Hey guys, just wanted to send you off this section's material for you to look at. I hope you got a lot out of the last section. I know the last section had a lot of content really surrounding what it would have been like for the African American, their plight coming out of newfound freedoms that actually didn't exist. Those stupid bubbles keep coming up. But yeah, no, the newfound freedoms they thought were going to be there didn't exist. The epic failure that was Reconstruction in the United States, the beginning of the pressures and the abuses that African Americans face, the separate but equal nonsense that was segregation, the minstrel shows, the way they were projected in media. Uh, I'm hoping that really gave you an eye-opening state to just this supposed new step for African Americans in America, but to find that really they still face horrendous racism just charged in a different direction. You'll find in this time that there are very few opportunities for African Americans as well to advance themselves financially. The few who do, really, they're isolated in small communities. The one area where you will find African Americans start to get new opportunities is with the onset of the 20th century are the two world wars. And one thing to note really quickly here is that African American population was primarily located in the South. Before World War One and Two, it was over 90%. It's not until the wars where all of a sudden a lot of white men are being sent off overseas to fight, particularly in the First World War. But the Second World War also has a huge amount of Caucasians going over to fight. That African Americans are all of a sudden given new opportunities to work in factories, particularly in the North, cities like Chicago and especially Detroit. Detroit today has one of the largest black populations in America. And a lot of that is because if you were in the South and you were a poor farmer and all of a sudden there's a manufacturing job, you can actually own a house and get a livable wage. And you're assembling parts for the war from these factories that used to make cars like Ford. Um, then people would come up and they would jump at that opportunity to take a new life for themselves. Interestingly enough, after World War II, especially when the men come back and find their jobs taken, it's going to cause a whole new level of tension. So, but that's going to be kind of the first waves of African American migration. Now, the section we're going to look at here today kind of fast forwards a little bit from what we've been looking at. You know, we really just ended the 19th century, went into the 20th century. We looked at all the kind of everything that set up this movement, and really we're going to go to the 1950s. In the 1950s, you're going to start to see the civil rights movement. And we're going to look really hard, particularly at one character, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because he's really probably the most prominent figure we think of. Next time we look at some material together, we'll look at the second great civil rights individual. That would be Malcolm X. And Malcolm X is a fascinating study, but we'll pause first and we'll look deep dive into Dr. King. Already there has been some advancements, slight as they may be. You have Jesse Owens, the famous black long distance runner who competed at the Olympics in Germany during Hitler's regime before the war, and he wins all sorts of medals. Hitler will famously not go and shake his hand, even though he shook everyone's hand who won. And he's African American, and he'll be a great hero. You'll see the color barrier broken in sports with Jackie Robinson in 1947, right after World War II. That was very significant. This is before Dr. King or anything like that. So, in many ways, Jackie Robinson is like some people consider that the beginning of the civil rights movement. It's like baseball was the sport in America. And even though it has a long history of African American players, some who were the greatest of all time never got a chance to play in Major League Baseball because of segregation rules in the game. And finally took the courage of one man, Brooklyn Dodgers owner Branch Rickey, to give Jackie Robinson an opportunity to play. He was the Rookie of the Year his first year. His second year, he was the MVP. He won a World Series. Hall of Famer, but he's really, some people argue he's the most important. He's not the greatest baseball player of all time, but he's probably the most important baseball player, maybe the most important sports figure of all time. That kind of kicks off a change in the mindset. All of a sudden, you're seeing whites have their perspectives changed on blacks who were taught from day one that they were not as intelligent, they were not as athletic, they could never compete. And all of a sudden, not only competing, they're thriving. Kind of opens the door for new figures to come into the sports realm. In the 50s, you're going to see, though, the civil rights movement really take off. So, what's going on in the South is, as we mentioned before, there's segregation. So, African Americans, particularly in schools, there are black schools or white schools, pools could not be segregated. So, you couldn't go swimming in the summertime together. Fountains couldn't be drank at the same places. You couldn't shop at the same department stores or eat at the same restaurants, at least not at the same times. Churches were even segregated, though that wasn't formal, it was in reality what happened. Um, and so you saw this very much in the South, and it was uncomfortable, very much uh, quite a bit poorer. And some of these states are at least a heavy minority of black population. Some states were a majority of black population. And so even though there was segregation where the minority of the population was on top, they very much for their infrastructure relied on African Americans to front bills. Here's an example. Because they were poor, cities, for you to go to work back and forth, you used the bus system. The bus system was by and large used by African Americans to get from point A to point B and really kept that whole system afloat. So, push is going to come to shove here. There's going to be some terrible incidents that happen. There's going to be a terrible death of a young child that you'll look at in one of your videos. That's really going to start prompting organizations like the NAACP to take a legal arm in trying to fight for better equality and rights within the United States. You're going to see presidents like President Eisenhower in the early 50s be challenged. There's going to be some protests that begin to happen. This is where Dr. King's story really comes into play. So what you're going to see in this video, in this section, is this is going to be video heavy. Okay, there's a few smaller videos that will look at people like Rosa Parks and give a little bit of background on Dr. King. But there's 5 videos on this, and each of them are about an hour long. So you're going to really have to carve out time here to sit down and watch these videos over the course of these next 8 or 9 days. And it's called the, I'm already forgetting what the name of the title is, excuse me. Um, but they're fantastic documentaries that were made in the 80s, and they really talk about the early civil rights movement. It was made by PBS, and so a lot of the issues that you see today weren't fully in these videos, but they'll document well from firsthand accounts some of the things that people had to endure. The documentary is called Eyes on the Prize. I'm sorry. So the first 5 episodes you'll want to watch, okay, in completion, and you'll kind of see how like Dr. King almost accidentally gets thrown into the limelight of the civil rights movement. He becomes their figurehead, and this young, gifted orator, pastor, will really be the person, the kind of the centered figure for American ideology for the next 15, 20 years. Now, Dr. King's story, we'll look at it in the next section going on forward too, because there are parts to his life that most people don't talk about, but there is some shady stuff that goes on there that really affects those of us who are in ministry. So we'll get there later. But what I want you to do is I want you to look at these videos, and then you had a book in your syllabus that I'm hoping that you've already started reading through, and that's Dr. King's autobiography, a lot of his famous speeches. You will want to probably make sure you're up to about the halfway point of that book by now, because there'll be 2 assignments in this, okay? So in the first assignment, you're going to look at 2 amendments. Now, what are amendments? The Constitution of the United States really had 10 legal statements that guaranteed the rights of individuals in the country. They were trying to start a new ideology. a new way of thinking and living. Um, Now there is, I can't even remember, like 20 some, okay? But they added some amendments because some of the situations in 1776 when they were made weren't realized in the 1950s or 60s. And so it takes a lot to add an amendment to the Constitution. In fact, there's some people who think there will never be another amendment again. It's that difficult to get that passed. But amazingly, in the 20th century, we saw some of the biggest amendments happen, and they have to do with the equal rights of the African American community. So I think it's the 14th and 15th Amendments. I'm going to ask you to read those. They're just paragraphs and see how they, like I think it says, like, see how they're ahead of their time and see how they failed um, um, when they were put out there. The second one will have to do about a few years into Dr. King's ministry after he's the civil rights leader. And he's going to get arrested a number of times through his protests. He's going to organize these incredibly powerful protests throughout the country. Blacks and whites will do these protests, and they're called sit-in protests. And essentially, they'll go into restaurants or department stores or anywhere where there's segregation, unjust laws. They'll sit down and they will refuse to move. People will hurl slurs at them. They'll punch them, but they will not move. They'll disrupt. They'll bring civil disobedience, and they'll be arrested. They will never use violence. That was something Dr. King was very big on. Never use violence, and was inspired by Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and Gandhi as well. But they're trying to bring awareness to the country through these civil disobedient acts. He'll be arrested a number of times on terribly trumped up charges. He'll write a famous letter from Birmingham jail. It's one of the chapters in your book. You're going to go read that chapter in its totality, and you're going to comment on it as you send me back a video. In that video, he's going to show how, although progress is being made, he's very disappointed at how slow it's going, how slow, like, the country is to catch on, how slow politicians are to make these obvious changes, and he's disappointed in the church, particularly the white church, that they haven't, like, come to back up this seemingly obvious gospel trait. So look at that stuff. There's a lot of material to look through this time. About 8 or 9 days from now, I'll send you another video and we'll look at Malcolm X. At some point here in the next, try to aim no later than, I would say March 20th, to send me a video with kind of your replies, okay?